Hello, good evening. I really like this library, by the way. I have to apologize for a couple of things. One is it's summertime and there's something in the air, and it's giving me a very hoarse voice, so I will I'll be doing that a lot. I'm afraid I'll try not to. I'll do it as little as I can. Other thing is that I have a very bad memory indeed, so I'll be relying on notes pretty heavily. I'll be repeating a little information you just heard. Judge Mulligan, James Mulligan, was born in Lexington on November 21st, 1844. He got a law degree from Transylvania, and he became a judge and a member of the House of Representatives and a state senator too, and obviously a judge. And I didn't know that his house was now the UK president's house. I wish I knew that when I wrote the book. He wrote poetry on the side, quite a bit of it. Most of it was just sort of light verse. He already mentioned, the most famous was called By Far in Kentucky, was the title. One of the most, probably one of the three most famous poems ever written about Kentucky, the others being Stephen Foster's song My Old Kentucky Home and Theodore O'Hara's Bivouac of the Dead about Mexican war soldiers. And he wrote it in 1902. It was a sensation. It appeared on all sorts of products like postcards and calendars, kind of like today. He didn't copyright it though. If he had, he would have made a fortune several times over. I read that as the years went by, he came to resent the poem, actually hated it very much, because it was pretty much the only thing he was noted for. And he wrote other poems that he thought personally were much better than that one, but no one ever wanted to talk about them. The last verse is the most famous one. And as he mentioned, the last line is the most famous part of the most famous verse. And it is, the songbirds are sweetest in Kentucky, the thoroughbreds the fleetest in Kentucky, mountains tower proudest, thunder peals the loudest, the landscape is the grandest, and politics the damnedest in Kentucky. That was considered kind of racy at the time. Today, of course, we hear worse things than that on the Disney Channel, but that kind of got people intrigued at the time. Other thing that Mulligan is famous for, other than the poem, probably something I'm sure he would rather not be famous for, is the fact that his family was nearly murdered by a poisoner. And to this day, nobody knows who it was because the culprit was never identified and never caught. He lived at Maxwell Place. His first wife, Mary, had died in 1876, and they had 4 children. Alice Malloy, James Jr., who lived in Chicago by 1904. Mary, who in 1904, at the time of the poisoning, had just gotten married to a Corporal Stevenson, Frank Stevenson, in Middlesboro. And the fourth was 35-year-old Lewis. He was the only one of the 4 who still lived in Lexington. He was, in fact, a doctor at the local asylum, the Eastern Asylum for the Insane. All 4 of the children were adults. They had all moved out of the house a long time ago. But Mulligan married a second time to Genevieve, also known as Jenny, and they also had 4 children, namely Dennis with 1 N. There was also an Uncle Dennis with 2 N's, Kathleen, Marion, and Willoughby. And the events took place on September 24th, 1904, 2 years after his famous poem was written. Mulligan himself was not at home that day, but the family sat down to eat lunch. They were going to be served a fish, salmon, with salad. And before anyone could take a bite of it, their servant, an African American named Lewis Mitchell, who was also a carriage driver and a handyman for the family, was clearly extremely nervous. And before they ate, he took Dennis Mulligan aside and he said, "Don't eat the fish, it's poisoned." So everyone took a good close look at it, and sure enough, there was some kind of white powder on it that they hadn't noticed before. To take it to be safe about it, they took it off to a chemist. Excuse me. That was what then the State University, later University of Kentucky, and the chemist analyzed the fish and said, yes, this is arsenic. It's powdered arsenic enough to kill 12 people. So how did it get there? That's the big question. Mitchell, the servant, said that one of the Mulligans paid him to put poison on the fish, but he wouldn't say which one it was. It was pretty well known that the 4 later children did not get along with the 4 earlier children by the first wife, because Judge Mulligan had come into a big inheritance lately, and the 4 younger ones thought they were going to be cut out. So a lot of bad feeling in the family. In fact, he was going to get somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000, which in 1904 was an incredible amount of money, close to $1 million. Also, property in Lexington and Kansas and Illinois, too. Let me see. Actually, I believe I got that backwards. It was thought that he was going to leave the money to the 4 younger children. So it was the 4 older children who were going to be cut out. Yeah, that's it. That's why I bring my notes. I have to have them. Well, that was the rumor. The rumor seemed confirmed when the servant, Lewis Mitchell, said that it was a family member who bribed him to put poison on the fish. And of course, he was arrested and taken to jail. There was always the possibility that he did it. He stuck to his story, but he kept adding very strange details to it. And he said that he had arrived at the house at 5:30 that morning, and he took the salmon, which had been sitting in the icebox for a day, prepared by the cook, Emma Morton. And he said that once he saw the fish, he was going to help himself to a bite, but he noticed there was white stuff on it, so he didn't eat it. And he claimed he had no idea what it was, but that doesn't make any sense, because if he was bribed to put poison on the fish, then he had to know what it was. And why would he even be tempted to take a bite of it? And not only that, he even told Emma the cook, take a look at the fish. What is this stuff? And he said he thought it was quinine. That was a medicine used at the time for malaria. And why it would be put on fish, I have no idea. Lots of parts of his story just plain didn't make any sense. He told Emma, the cook, that he had been paid to put the poison, or he didn't say poison, put the powder on the fish, and also he said he was soon going to have enough money that he could move out of the city. So that's not even beginning the suspicious part of it. He told the cook all about it. Once they were about to eat the fish, he changed his mind, apparently deciding he didn't want to be a killer for hire after all. And also Mrs. Mulligan, Jenny, the second, had kept him out of prison once. I'm not sure exactly the circumstances, but I guess he didn't want to poison the person who once saved him from going to jail. Excuse me. Then he confessed again, and this time he said that a figure dressed in black, who was clearly a woman, but wearing black head to toe, was in the yard the night before. And then he said when he went to the kitchen that morning, I guess before he pointed out the white powder on the fish, that a man with a gun had ordered him to leave the house. Apparently so the man with the gun could put the poison on the fish. So we've got at least 3 different versions from the servant about what happened that morning. But earlier in the day, he said he was paid to put it on himself. The cook was a very obvious suspect because she had access to the food, and they arrested her, but the Mulligans really stood up for her. They said she's been in the family for years. She's been a very trusted servant. They were so emphatic about it that they let Emma the cook go. In fact, she went right back to work in the kitchen. So I think that shows that they definitely had great trust in her. Mulligan, the judge, called in the chief of detectives, J.W. Marshall, and he was dropping hints right from the beginning that he suspected a family member did it. He said it was, I quote, a family affair, and he asked the detective to keep the story out of the papers. That certainly didn't work. It got into the papers almost immediately. But that's interesting because it shows that the judge himself thought that very possibly one of his own children tried to kill everyone in the family. Or maybe he wasn't trying to kill everyone in the family. Maybe he was just after a particular person. Some people thought the poisoner was after Genevieve, aka Jenny. Some people thought the poisoner was after the 4 children. Some people thought the poisoner was after the judge himself. So we don't even really know who the specific target was. Mitchell went in for another examination a couple mornings later. This time he was more specific. This time he named a name. He said that the person who paid him to poison the fish was James Mulligan Jr., who happened to be in town. You may remember that his sister was getting married recently. He was in town for the wedding. You may also remember he lived in Chicago, but that's what he was doing in Lexington. So he did have an opportunity to poison the fish if it was he who paid to have it done. Lewis Mitchell, in fact, said he got paid $100 to poison the fish. Well, the judge didn't believe the story, even though he'd already told detectives he thought a family member was behind it. James Jr. was not arrested. He went right back to Chicago after the sister's wedding, but then he returned on the 27th to answer questions and to clear his name. He took a room at the Phoenix Hotel, which is kind of interesting because it sort of hints that nobody in the family wanted him to stay at the house. Not only that, nobody came to visit him except his sister, one of his many sisters, and no other family member came to see James Jr. Well, the public loves a mystery, so the town was full of rumors. Some believed that Lewis Mitchell told the truth about James Jr. Some people thought that Lewis himself, after telling all the contradictory stories, was behind it. Some people blamed the cook because everybody wants to blame the cook. There were some people who thought that James Jr.'s confession was, or Lewis Mitchell's confession was mostly true, but he was lying about the person who bribed him to poison the fish. Even stranger, after Lewis Mitchell confessed, the Lexington detectives quit investigating. And I don't know why. I've never quite figured that one out. In fact, Lewis Jr. hired a couple of out-of-town Chicago detectives to come check it out since the local ones apparently stopped. The leading suspect was James Mulligan Jr. because he was the one who got named. Mulligan, the judge, said that if his son got in trouble, that he would not try to do anything about it. He would not try to keep him out of jail. He would make sure that the law was enforced, that he would not drop the charges. Excuse me. Lewis Mitchell's examining trial began a few months later on October 7th, a very embarrassing experience for the family because a lot of family secrets were told under oath. It turns out that the judge and his wife and Dennis testified about the lack of harmony between the 4 older children and the 4 younger ones. In fact, Dennis said that Mitchell, the servant, was extremely nervous before serving the fish, as though he knew something was about to happen. Genevieve, the mother, said her relations with James Jr. were good and affectionate, but she also said that 3 years before, he had said he intended to drown himself and take 3 other people out with him, people he didn't name. He said, quote, "I will commit a crime that will astound the world," but he never went into detail and apparently did not fulfill his threat there. Excuse me. Another thing that the judge admitted under oath was that his relations with his daughter Mary were very, very strained, at least for 3 years. She had wanted to go to Mammoth Cave with some other people her age, and he didn't approve of the boys who were going along. And evidently the Mulligans had such a falling out over that Mary moved out of the house and moved in with her sister Alice, and James Jr. got upset about it enough that he also moved out. So there were those who thought that if there was a poisoning among the family members, the motive might not have been the inheritance after all. It might have been the bad feeling engendered by Mary's leaving the house. And also, you remember Mary had recently married a soldier named Frank Stevenson, who the judge did not like at all, partly because he was, I quote, only a corporal. I guess if he'd been a higher rank, maybe the judge would have approved of him, but there was a lot of bad family feeling over the marriage too. Emma Morton got on the stand. She was the cook. And she also told about Mitchell's apparently foreknowledge that something was wrong with the fish and that he had warned the family not to eat it just before they were about to eat it. She did not believe the fish was poisoned at first. She didn't believe it until the chemistry professor confirmed that there was arsenic in it. James Denny, Lewis Mitchell's attorney, on October 8th said that his client should be acquitted. Also said Mulligan should be grateful that Mitchell's quick actions and guilty conscience had saved his family. The lawyer Denny alleged that James Jr. and Genevieve Mulligan poisoned the fish together. That is, the mother and one of the older children. This doesn't really make much sense either. You can see where James Jr. might have had a motive to do it, but where the mother of the family's motive comes in, it's pretty hard to discern. And the upshot of the whole thing was that the magistrate ruled that Lewis Mitchell would have to face the grand jury and be tried for attempted murder. And the grand jury continued to investigate the crime, even though the local detectives stopped. Well, Judge Mulligan, you may recall, was eager to keep the story out of the papers, but now that his own wife was accused of possibly being a potential poisoner, he blew his stack. The very next day, he said he wanted every possible clue investigated, all the way up to the hilt, and he publicly threatened the detectives who were examining clues with lingering death. I would like to quote part of what the judge said, and believe me, he said a lot more than this. I think it's interesting because it gives you an idea how Kentuckians threatened each other back in 1904. If my voice were better, I would try to shout this to really get the emphasis across. I have stood the slander from this recreant sod of a son as long as I can. From now on, the scabbard is off, and war is to the knife. I give warning to all, be they snide lawyers or detectives, if they invent any slander on my wife or any member of my family, I will avenge it with my life's blood. If I am killed in the attempt to protect the good name of my wife, I will leave others behind to avenge my death. So it's not every day you get to hear a judge threaten reporters and attorneys and detectives with their wives, and even saying that if he dies, he's got kin who he hopes will avenge his death. I always think it's kind of funny. The two Chicago detectives apparently were so terrified by this threat that they never came into the courthouse again. Two major developments developed on October the 13th. Mulligan Jr. was freed, but Lewis Mitchell was indicted. And Mrs. Mulligan's name was never mentioned in court again. So either there was simply no evidence against her, or that threat scared off everybody involved in the legal system. And the focus of the investigation changed by this point. Before, they were pretty sure that the real target was Genevieve Mulligan and maybe her children. Now they thought the poisoner was out to get the judge, even though the judge wasn't even home at lunchtime that day. The trial for the servant began January 3rd, 1905. There was a deadlocked jury. There was a retrial scheduled for the middle of the year. James Jr. went back to Chicago and didn't come back to testify. He could have been subpoenaed. They didn't bother. I'm not sure why that is, unless, again, that lingering threat terrified them into not doing anything. But his absence might have helped Lewis Mitchell, because James Jr. was kind of the only person who could swear whether the story was true or not. On June 28th, the jury deliberated for only 10 minutes, and they acquitted Lewis Mitchell. And he never explained why he told the story about the woman dressed in black in the yard. He never explained the story about the man with the gun in the kitchen. Never really explained anything else from that point on. We still don't know if it's true that a Mulligan relative bribed him to poison the fish. If so, we don't know which one. We don't know why. So it will probably be a mystery forever. Although the three favorite suspects to this day are Mulligan Jr., Genevieve Mulligan, and Lewis Mitchell. But while doing my research, I found another suspect among the family. You sort of had to read between the lines, but there was someone else in the family they suspected, and evidently they dropped the whole thing and never followed up on it. But one of the questions that they asked the judge was, have any of your children been in Middlesboro lately? And the only one who had been was Mary, because her corporal husband was a recruiter in Middlesboro. As far as I know, that's the only one of the Mulligans with a Middlesboro tie. And the police were so interested in it, they asked Middlesboro police if they would examine any arsenic on sale in the city so it could be compared to the arsenic found on the fish. So they thought they, thought they had a pretty good lead there. And again, it appears to have gone nowhere. But I don't know, if Judge Mulligan's recently married daughter had actually bought the arsenic and put it on the fish, that would have been a sensation far beyond anything else ever connected to the story. He would be famous for something more than just writing the poem In Kentucky. I would also like to tell you a story about another Lexington crime that took place about 50 years before that one. It was Christmas time, December 29th, 1853, and a Mrs. William Weigart entered Darlinghouse's candy store in Lexington. The clerk was a young man named Luther Cushing, who must have been in a sentimental mood. I guess, it was Christmas time, and he was working in a candy store. And he gave her a little pat on the back, and he said something she found highly offensive. So offensive, in fact, she ran out to go find her husband. So I'm sure you're wondering what he said. I'll tell you. But brace yourself. Cushing, the clerk, said to his customer, "What will you have, pretty?" Maybe it was the way he said it. But she ran off to get her husband. Obviously, he was badly worried, the clerk, because 30 minutes later, when the husband showed up, he had borrowed a gun from someone in case he needed it for self-defense. It didn't help, though, because Mr. Weigart, he entered shooting. In fact, he shot 4 times at the clerk, missed him 3 times, but the 4th one hit Cushing in the back as he was hiding behind a counter. So he shot a man in the back, and there was really no way to get around this. It couldn't be called self-defense in any way. On New Year's Day, 1854, just a few days later, William Weigart was remanded to jail. He went on trial on June 15th, 1855. Observe how quickly the justice system moved. He was found guilty the next day after the jury deliberated only a few minutes. The attorney applied for a retrial. The judge said no. And he was sentenced to be hanged only about 2 weeks later. He was sentenced to be hanged on August 12th. Usually, there's appeal after appeal, after an appeal. Usually the sentence is delayed months and even years, but not in this case. They couldn't find any reason to give him a new trial. On August 12, William Weigart stood on the gallows in the middle of Lexington. They did not do hangings in private jailhouse yards in those days. It was out on the street. So thousands of people came to see it. He was standing on the platform, the rope around his neck, and evidently he wanted to just get it all over with, because instead of waiting for the trap to open, he jumped off the platform. So you could argue that he actually committed suicide instead of getting legally hanged. That's one of the public executions in Lexington. I'll tell you another one with a kind of I guess I'd call it a twist ending maybe. And I'll be happy to answer any questions too if you have any. This was an 1854 murder, not in Lexington, but very, very close to it. Excuse me. There was a farmer named James O. Fraser, or Frazier. The papers spelled his name about 12 different ways, but mostly it was Fraser with a Z. He lived near Lexington. In 1854, he went to New York to sell some livestock, and that took a while in those days, so he was gone about 4 months. On September 30th, he sent his family a telegram saying he was on his way home, would be there very, very soon. In fact, that very night, he was scheduled to come home. His neighbor, Lewis Castleman, who's still a pretty famous name in Lexington, came to pick him up at the train depot and give him a ride home. Then Castleman returned to his own home, which was close enough that he heard gunshots a little bit later, about a half hour, coming from the Fraser homestead. Castleman hurried over. All the lights were out. He pounded the door. Nobody answered. He could hear activity going on inside, though. And finally, they opened the door. And when Castleman entered, he found Mr. Fraser lying dead on the couch from an obvious gunshot blast. His wife, Mrs. Elizabeth Fraser, and their 11-year-old daughter was upstairs. And downstairs near the body was their handyman, their overseer, a 23-year-old named George Grigg. Castleman asked, "What happened here?" And Grigg said he shot himself by accident. He was trying to kill a rat. So the story was, after a grueling 4-month trip to New York and back, within 30 minutes of coming home, Fraser had this urge to shoot a rat. We'll see how much of this story you believe as we go. Castleman thought this sounded a little bit fishy. He took a closer look at the body and found it was very badly bruised. He had 3 broken ribs, 2 different gunshot wounds, one through the hand, a defensive wound, clearly, and his throat had been slashed. All this from rat killing. He noticed that the carpet was wet, where it had clearly been scrubbed very, very recently. Also, Castleman, when he had dropped Fraser off at his house earlier that evening, Grigg was present, and Grigg was wearing different clothes now than he had been wearing earlier in the evening. So what was Fraser doing on the couch? Grigg said that after his boss accidentally slashed his own throat and shot himself twice, once in the hand trying to kill a rat, that he put the body on the couch. Castleman asked, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Because Mrs. Fraser asked me to." because, you know, he's the man of all work, and part of his work involved putting a bloody corpse on a couch. Why did he change his clothes? Greg said it was, he thought it would look suspicious if he didn't. He was also missing the buttons on his pants. So he must have changed in quite a hurry. The buttons were found on the floor by the fireplace. Later, when the cops said, "Can you show us the bloody clothes?" he couldn't. So they disappeared. Castleman thought it was just as fishy as you do. To make things worse, when Mrs. Fraser came downstairs, she seemed very indifferent and very blasé, as though this were sort of an everyday thing and nothing to get very concerned about. Her version of events, she agreed that Mr. Fraser had shot himself by accident within a half hour of coming home trying to kill a rat. Why did she wash the carpet? Well, she just thought it was a good time to do it. You know, these domestic chores don't do themselves, you know. Oh, and all this stuff happened in a locked room with a locked house with all the lights out. So I think it's pretty obvious that Mr. Greg and Mrs. Fraser didn't have time to cook up a better story. Well, Castleman got the Lexington police. What was the motive? The neighbors had suspected for a long time that there was an affair going on between Mrs. Fraser and the handyman. All of the suspicious facts noted above were noticed by the investigators right away. There was a coroner's inquest on October 2nd, and reporters and others noticed that Greg, Mrs. Fraser, and the Fraser daughter all told nearly identical stories, as though they had been coached or memorized something. One reporter said it almost sounded like they were all three reading off the same sheet of paper. Their stories they matched a little too well, we would say. So what could they say in Mrs. Fraser's defense after all this? Well, the defense simply pointed out that she was from one of the oldest and most respectable families in the state. And Mr. Grigg, the overseer, also had always had a good character. So basically the only thing they could come up with was, well, they've always been good people before, so they shouldn't be suspected now. The jury wasn't convinced. The jury said they do have to stand trial. They were held on a $5,000 bond apiece, which in that time was an absolutely astronomical sum of money. So clearly somebody out there thought they were not good candidates to be walking the streets. The trial began in mid-February 1855. Strangely, despite all this evidence against them, the jury was hung. They couldn't come to an agreement. They had to be tried again in June. This time the prosecution brought in a jury from Bourbon County. They were thinking, well, the Fayette County jury is not going to do a fair trial. We'll bring in people from outside. But then the Bourbon Countians also, they totally acquitted the two of them. It was said that they believed this very well-rehearsed story that the daughter told, and that was more important to them than any physical evidence. So a lot of people in Lexington thought that Mrs. Fraser and Mr. Grigg got away with murder, a very, very poorly planned murder. They sold the farm. They moved in together, which kind of lends credence to the rumors, I think, about the affair. Not too long afterwards, the Fraser daughter died when her dress caught fire. And there were people who said, they set her on fire on purpose so she wouldn't tell what she knew. Of course, we don't know that. But then something else happened, and I have to be very, very careful how I phrase this. In April 1857, by which time they had moved to Mason County, a mob broke in to Mr. and Mrs. Grigg's house And they were armed with a knife, and they removed a certain portion of Mr. Griggs' anatomy that he was probably very sorry to lose. Yeah, I can say no more than that, but use your imagination. And I'm sure a lot of people thought he deserved it too. And those are the Lexington stories that I brought. I have a lot more. I did bring a few books with me. Unfortunately, the Lexington book, I sold almost all of them the last time I did a talk, and I didn't have time to restock, so I've only got one. Excuse me, one. It's time for a drink. Anybody have questions? I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Oh, yes. Excuse me. Oh. Well, the daughter Mary, who just got married, and see, I can't even remember the guy's name, and I just said it. The guy who was a corporal in the Army, he was also a recruiter, and he was a recruiter in Middlesboro. So they were asking the Middlesboro police, please check on any arsenic sold in drugstores there, because we want to see if the arsenic there matches the arsenic used on the fish. So you're welcome. I probably didn't make that as clear as I should have.
But it did not match.
There was never anything in the papers about it. So I assume it didn't. I guess if it did match, it would have been all over the papers, unless they were afraid the judge was going to come murder them. And then maybe they just didn't talk about it. But evidently, she was another suspect that they never really talked about in the papers. Oh, yes.
Any idea about how many of these public hangings were women? And do you think Miss Fraser might have gotten off because, women, we're just so sweet and domesticated?
Oh, it worked all the time.
We would never.
It totally worked all the time. Yeah. Offhand, I can't think of any women who were hanged in Kentucky. Now, there had to be a few. In those days, of course, women did not serve on juries. It were all male juries, and they had a sense of chivalry, and they didn't want to hang women. No matter how guilty they were, no matter how much proof was against them, about the most they would do is send them to jail for a while. But very often they didn't even do that. And it's really incredible how many just totally were set free.
Well, it's just not in our nature.
Well, they would use that. That was usually used as an argument. Like the Lizzie Borden trial. If you read the transcript, about half the argument is she couldn't have done it. She's a woman. Women don't do that. They don't kill people with hatchets. But there are lots of cases when they did. So it was just they didn't want to believe it. And it was used as a way to get... one of my books, it's called... I can't even remember my book titles. That's a fact. It was a recent one. It's about crime in the Midwest. It's called Murderous Acts, 100 Years of Murder in the Midwest. That's it. There's a whole chapter in there on Chicago. And Chicago is, of course, a big, rough, tough, brawling city. And it almost became a joke. It did become a joke. It was a national joke about how juries would not convict women for anything.
Even now.
Well, if they were good looking, they could count on getting out. So, yeah, there's a book called, it's by Laura James, it's called The Beauty Defense. And the whole book is just one case after another of women getting away with murder because they were good looking.
Even now, though, if there's a mass shooting or a serial killer that turns out to be a woman,
yeah,
it's shocking.
And the younger, the better. Excuse me. Yeah, that's sort of a theme running through my books. You'll see it coming back repeatedly. They couldn't vote, but they could get away with murder. And boy, did they.
So if you were an ugly woman, you were just kind of out of luck.
Even then, they often wouldn't do it. Maybe a jail term. maybe a jail term.
Where
Yes.
do we know where these hangings took place? Was it in or around the courthouse?
They were, now if you read the book, I usually give the streets where they took place. They didn't all take place in the same area. Now, a lot of them did. There were favorite places to do hangings, but if you read, and there's also a book on Louisville murders, and they were done in various neighborhoods. But there was actually, since you mentioned the courthouse, there was a lynching at the Lexington courthouse. And I forget the year, it was in the 1850s, I think. It's in the book. But the tree wasn't strong enough to hang the guy with, so they stuck a pole out the window, a second floor window, and hanged him from that. And then later the same year or the next year, they hanged a bunch of effigies from a tree at the Lexington courthouse. There was a murder in I wish I had time to tell that one because it's really kind of funny. This guy just committed a flagrant murder in a bar, and he was, if I remember correctly, the grandson of Isaac Shelby, the first governor of Kentucky, and he so got away with it. And one of his attorneys was Henry Clay, so he was very well connected. And the public was so angry that he got away with the murder that they hanged 9 effigies from a tree. Usually there was 1 effigy, but 9, that's really something. There were 8 jury members and 1 judge. That's actually a pretty funny story. They weren't hanging real people, just dummies, and that makes it funny. I think. Oh, yes. Oh, the Mulligan murder took place, it wasn't a murder, I'm sorry, an attempted murder, 1904. So the poem came in 1902. He was already world famous for that poem. And then came the murder sensation 2 years later. If anyone had actually gone to jail for that, it would have been even more of a sensation. Excuse me, it's the weather. Oh, I'd have to get the book for the details because I don't remember anything. Now I have to try to find it. The quick oh, here we are. Now, which one was that? Was it the lynching story or was it? Oh, yeah, that one. I think that was the one where they were hanging all the dummies from the tree. Well, to put it really simply, it was, oh, I did remember something. Wow. I know, if I remember something, I'm astonished. Lafayette Shelby, the grandson of Governor Shelby, just strolled right into a Lexington store and shot the clerk. It wasn't a bar, it was a clerk. So many stories take place in a bar in the book that it's also kind of a running joke. They called them coffee houses. That was sarcastic. They didn't sell coffee, they sold liquor, but they were called coffee houses. Coffee houses. January 1846. And he went on trial in July. Despite the fact that he obviously did it, he totally got set free by the jury. Then they hanged 8 jurors in effigy and the judge too, but they didn't hang Henry Clay. I thought that was kind of interesting. He was so admired in Lexington, they didn't even hang him in effigy, although he was this guy's attorney. And they put signs on the effigies, and it was like an editorial cartoon come to life. They had things like perjury written on them. And one of them had an empty skull, an empty head, get it? Because he was right. One had his hand in his pocket like he was taking a bribe, real subtle stuff. And the courthouse custodian in the morning said, "Do you want me to cut these things down?" And the courthouse attorneys and officials said, "No, we didn't put them up. The vandals can come take them down," which means they swung all day long and attracted hundreds of people. And finally, they were cut down and dragged through the streets and set on fire over on Cheapside. I'm not sure where that is in Lexington, or even if it still exists. Cheapside, it's still there? Okay, the next.
Right next to the old courthouse.
Oh, okay. Well, they didn't have to travel too far. They just dragged the dummies a little bit, piled them up, set them on fire, and I guess they thought that made a point.
Where they sold slaves.
And so that's basically the story of the Governor Shelby's grandson getting away with murder.
Wouldn't have been the first. He wouldn't have been the first governor's son or relative to get away with murder.
I know in another book I've got another story of another governor. It was Disha, I think. And his son totally got away with murder down in Mississippi, if I remember right. Which generally I don't. But I think that's correct. Yes?
Have you run into King McNamara?
Yes, there is a whole chapter on King McNamara. Oh, that's a real epic. You can make a movie out of that one. He did. They were so upset over him, again, flagrantly getting away with murder. He was another one with political connections. His family was very powerful politically in Lexington and pretty much could do anything they wanted. And he shot a guy for the stupidest reason you can possibly imagine. Now imagine a stupid reason. Well, this is stupider. The other thing that made it kind of interesting was it happened during what was possibly the coldest day in Kentucky history up to that point. Let me find the date and the temperatures. Kentucky was undergoing a historic cold snap. Excuse me. In some places it was minus 42 degrees. In Lexington it was minus 20. So yeah, this was in 1899, February 1899. And King McNamara, King was his nickname. King McNamara shot a man named Jacob Keller. And here's the reason why. It was really, really cold outside, and McNamara stepped on Keller's heels. And Keller said, "Get off my heel." And McNamara said, "Get off the earth," and shot him right through the abdomen. He didn't like being told, "Don't step on my heels." And he disappeared, and for years there were rumors about him being alive or dead. And finally he was caught in Louisville. He'd been hiding in Louisville. Let me see what year it was. It was something like 20 years later. I have to look up the date. They caught him around (1912). And it came out that his whole family knew where he was. He was in hiding. They were never arrested for aiding and abetting, though it was clear that they knew he was alive and hiding in Louisville. So that's a real, I didn't know that anybody knew about King McNamara. So I'm impressed to see someone who's heard of him. That really should be a more famous story. It would make a good movie. Any other questions?
Any theories about Betty Gale Brown?
You know, that would be someone did write a book about her. There may be a couple stories. Very interesting story. Betty Gale Brown, she was killed on the Transylvania campus in, I think, 1961, something like that. Right, sitting in her car. And that's one that really should have been solved, but it was never officially solved. I never wrote about that one because I just couldn't find anything new to say about it. If I, had a new angle, I'd do it, but also it was kind of well, I don't know that you'd call that recent. But I try not to write about anything that's really recent. So generally, I don't write about anything that happened after 1940 or so. It's sort of my cutoff because people get mad at you. Relatives of victims and relatives, you can see why they might. Relatives of killers. I've actually heard from some relatives of people over the years who, yeah, there was one family in particular, I guess I shouldn't name them, but I hear from them once in a while. They say things like, I've never read your book, but, and then they'll go on to say, my great grandpappy told me, and then there follows a story that totally contradicts everything in the known historical record. And it's just clearly not true, but who wants to admit it was a really atrocious murder? It's not something you would want to talk about your family members having done. I've noticed, though, something I call the two-generation rule. And it goes like this. If somebody commits a murder, the family won't talk about it for 2 generations, and then they become proud of it. So they won't talk about great uncle getting hanged for 2 generations, and then suddenly, good old great uncle, he got hanged. He's cool.
Have you researched George Remus in Northern Kentucky?
Which one?
George Remus.
Oh, there was a book about that recently. I can't remember the title. Me being me. It was a great book, but again, I just read and said, I have nothing to add, so I won't touch that one because I could not possibly improve on the book that's already been done about it. I do a lot of not just historical true crime, but just straight out history too, Kentucky and otherwise. Also paranormal, supernatural, spooky type stories. Those are always fun. So you might see me around Halloween doing talks on Kentucky ghosts and things like that. Hopefully my voice will be better by then. I need to invest in a box of lozenges or something.